Alice Roosevelt Longworth was, for most of the 20th century, one of the most observed women in America. She was the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, the wife of a Speaker of the House, the friend or enemy of every significant political figure from Wilson to Nixon. She was sharp, funny, dangerous, and entirely uninterested in being anyone other than herself. She lived to 96. She was, throughout that long life, one of Washington's permanent landmarks. In 1925, when she was 41 years old, Alice gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Paulina. Her husband, Nicholas Longworth, acknowledged the child. He had no reason to do otherwise in public. They were married. The child had been born into the marriage. The law was clear. What Washington knew, and what Alice herself confirmed in conversations over decades, conversations that were private enough to function as secrets, but public enough to function as something else, was that Paulina's father was not Nicholas Longworth. Her father was William Edgar Borah, United States Senator from Idaho. This is that story. Chapter 1. Alice. Alice Lee Roosevelt was born on February 12, 1884, in New York City. Her mother, Alice Hathaway Lee, died 2 days later of kidney failure, on the same day and in the same house that Theodore Roosevelt's mother died of typhoid fever. Her father, the future president, was 25 years old and had just lost, in a single day, the two women who had organized his domestic world. He did not initially appear capable of raising the child. He left for the Dakota Badlands, where he spent nearly 2 years ranching and grieving in a manner that was apparently incompatible with infant care. Alice was left with his sister Bamie, who raised her through early childhood with evident affection and competence. When Theodore returned, when he remarried, his second wife was Edith Caro, a childhood friend. Alice was folded into the reconstituted family with all the complexity that the word stepmother implied in 1887. She was not, by the accounts of those who knew her as a child and as a young woman, easy. She was willful, testing, determined to occupy space in ways that made authority figures uncomfortable. Her father, who was not himself a comfortable authority figure for anyone, found her simultaneously entertaining and exasperating. There is a famous story, likely apocryphal but circulated widely enough to have acquired the status of truth, in which someone complained to Theodore Roosevelt about Alice's behavior, and he responded that he could either run the country or control Alice, but not both. She was given to the public in 1902, when Theodore Roosevelt became president, and she was 18. She was immediately a subject of fascination. She was beautiful, unconventional, quick-witted, and apparently unbothered by the attention. She smoked cigarettes. She placed bets. She attended events she was not supposed to attend, and wore clothes that prompted editorials. She became, in the shorthand of the era, the most talked about young woman in America. Her father coined a phrase that has followed her ever since. She had, he said, to have a lot of fun, but she must not go too far. She went too far, routinely, for the next 70 years. Chapter 2. Nicholas Longworth. Nicholas Longworth was, when Alice met him in 1902, 33 years old and a newly elected congressman from Cincinnati, Ohio. He was from a wealthy Ohio family with Republican credentials appropriate to the era. He was handsome in a way that photographs from the period confirm without quite explaining. The kind of handsome that reads as authority rather than attractiveness. He played the violin, which in the social world of turn-of-the-century Washington was the kind of accomplishment that opened doors. He was also, by the time Alice met him and by the consistent account of people who knew him well, a man who liked women in a way that was not specific to his wife. He had what was called, in the vocabulary of the time, a roving eye. This was not unusual among the men of his class and era. It was not something that was typically discussed in public. It was something that was known. Alice and Nicholas married in February 1906 at the White House. It was one of the major social events of the Roosevelt presidency. Thousands of cards were sent. Gifts arrived from heads of state. The wedding cake was enormous. Alice wore a dress that was described in the newspapers with the level of detail ordinarily reserved for military operations. Theodore Roosevelt, who was at the height of his popularity and power, walked his daughter down the aisle. The country watched. The marriage was not, by most accounts, particularly close. They were compatible in the sense that both were politically engaged, socially connected, and capable of maintaining a public image that served them both. They were not, in the private accounts that have emerged over decades, deeply intimate. Nicholas continued to be a man who liked women in ways that were not specific to Alice. Alice continued to be a woman who was, fundamentally, more interested in the world than in any single person within it. Nicholas Longworth rose in Republican politics throughout the 1910s and became Speaker of the House in 1925, a position he held until his death in 1931. He was, by the accounts of colleagues and historians, a genuinely effective legislator, pragmatic, convivial, capable of the coalition building that the House requires. He is not particularly remembered today, because Speakers of the House are rarely remembered. But in his time, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington. Chapter 3. William Borah. William Edgar Borah was born in 1865 in Wayne County, Illinois. He was from a farming family and had educated himself through a combination of determination and the kind of relentless self-improvement that characterized ambitious men of the prairie in the late 19th century. He read law. He was admitted to the bar in Kansas. He moved to Idaho in 1890, where the terrain, physical and political, suited him. He was elected to the United States Senate in 1907 and would serve there until his death in 1940, 33 years, making him one of the longest-serving senators of his era. He was a Republican, but the word means something different in his case than it does in most. He was an insurgent, an independent, a man who voted his convictions on tariffs, on foreign intervention, on labor, on the League of Nations, in ways that made him difficult to categorize and impossible to control. He was known in the press as the Lion of Idaho. He was 6 feet tall, broad, with a head that cartoonists found useful. He was also, throughout his life, attractive to women in a way that was not only about the physical. He was intelligent, genuinely engaged with ideas, capable of the kind of sustained attention that makes a person feel, in his presence, as though they are the most interesting person he has encountered. This is a quality that prominent men sometimes develop and sometimes are born with. Borah had been born with it. He was married, from 1895, to Mary McConnell, the daughter of the governor of Idaho. The marriage was publicly conventional. Privately it was, by the accounts of people who knew them, a coexistence rather than a companionship. Mary was a quiet woman. William was not a quiet man. He and Alice Roosevelt Longworth had known each other since at least the early 1910s. Washington is a small city in the ways that matter. Their social worlds intersected constantly. They were both highly visible, both politically engaged, both sharpened by decades in proximity to power. What began as social acquaintance became, at some point in the late teens or early 1920s, something else. Chapter 4. The relationship. Alice and Borah's relationship has been the subject of careful biographical study without, even now, being completely mapped. The primary obstacle is Alice herself. She was, throughout her life, someone who understood the difference between what she said to a trusted friend and what she said to a biographer, and she managed that difference with considerable skill. What she said to trusted friends over decades has been reported in enough biographical accounts to constitute a picture. She said that Borah was the love of her life. She said this in private, not once, but multiple times, to people she trusted and who later, after her death, reported it. She did not say it for public consumption. She understood that saying it publicly would have consequences for Borah's political career, for her own marriage, and for Paulina, who was alive for most of the years during which these conversations occurred. She also, apparently, did not much trouble herself to deny it to the people she was speaking with privately. This is the particular mode of discretion she employed. She did not broadcast, but she also did not pretend to the people she trusted that the truth was something other than what it was. The relationship, in whatever form it took, whatever formal or informal arrangement governed it, continued for years. Borah came to dinner. They attended the same events. They moved, in the small world of Washington's permanent political class, in constant proximity. Mary Borah was also present in this world. Nicholas Longworth was also present. The arrangements that obtained in this world, the arrangements that allowed two marriages to continue while something else was also happening, were not unique to Alice and Borah, but they were, in this case, more consequential than most. Chapter 5. Paulina. Paulina Longworth was born on February 14, 1925, Valentine's Day. Alice was 41 years old. Nicholas was 55. The birth was late, by the measure of the 1920s, notably so for a first child, and prompted some private comment in Washington circles, though not public discussion of the kind that would have required a response. Nicholas Longworth acknowledged the child. He was, by the accounts of people who knew the family in those years, genuinely fond of her. Whether he knew or suspected, or had arrived at a position of deliberate non-inquiry, the various biographers of Alice and of Washington in that period have offered different assessments. What is clear is that he performed the role of father without apparent reservation. Paulina was named for a female saint, which was an unusual naming choice for a family that was not notably religious. Some of Alice's biographers have read significance into this. Paulina, as an acknowledgement, in the coding available to the era, of something irregular. Others find this over-interpretation. Alice herself never explained the name, which was itself a kind of explanation. Alice was not, by the accounts of Paulina's childhood, a particularly warm mother. This is a complicated charge to lay against a woman who had herself been raised in circumstances that provided more public attention than private warmth. She loved Paulina. She also maintained the same orientation toward Paulina that she maintained toward most things. A slightly ironic distance. A tendency to observe rather than to immerse, a reflexive avoidance of the kind of open emotional expressiveness that would have required her to be a different person than she was. Nicholas Longworth died in April 1931. Paulina was 6 years old. He had been Speaker of the House. He died of pneumonia, having never quite recovered from a respiratory illness that winter. Alice was 47. She did not, after his death, remarry. She remained Alice Roosevelt Longworth, taking the name that was both her birthright and her marriage, because it was, in combination, the most powerful name available to her. Chapter 6. The Open Secret. Washington has always had its secrets. It has also always had its open secrets, the things that everyone in the relevant circles knows and that are maintained as secrets only in the sense that no one discusses them in a context where discussion would carry formal consequences. The parentage of Paulina Longworth was, for much of the 1920s and afterward, an open secret of this type. People knew. Or people suspected strongly enough that the distinction was not meaningful in practice. This was not secret as rumor, the flimsy, contested, possibly wrong kind. This was secret as fact, the kind that is not discussed in newspapers but is mentioned in private correspondence and in conversations between people who are trying to understand what they are observing. Alice did not confirm it in print during her lifetime. She confirmed it in various degrees of explicitness, in private. in conversations reported by friends, by biographers who spoke with her, by people who were in a position to ask and who asked and who received from Alice answers that were as clear as anything she chose to say directly. She was capable of saying that someone else was Paulina's father in a way that could be characterized afterward as not quite a statement. A raised eyebrow, a pause, a laugh that acknowledged the question without formally answering it. Borah, for his part, was also not entirely silent. He wrote letters to Paulina when she was young. He maintained, by several accounts, a proprietary interest in her welfare that went slightly beyond what his relationship to Alice alone would explain. He died in January 1940, when Paulina was 14 years old. Whether Paulina herself knew, by that point, is not established. Chapter 7. Paulina. Paulina Longworth had a difficult life. This is stated in every account of her that exists, because every account is obligated to confront the same set of facts. She was the daughter of a woman who was one of the most observed and sharpest people of her era. She grew up in the specific pressure of Washington proximity to power, and she did not thrive in any of the ways that would have made her existence easier to narrate. She married in 1944, when she was 19, a man named Alexander McCormick Sturm. He was an artist, a writer, somewhat erratic, from a family of means. They had one child, a daughter named Joanna, born in 1946. Alexander Sturm died in 1951, of a liver condition brought on in part by drinking. He was 23 years old. Paulina was 26, a widow with a 5-year-old daughter. She struggled. She struggled with depression, with alcohol, with the particular difficulty of being the daughter of someone whose force of personality made everything in the vicinity seem smaller by comparison. Alice was not cruel to Paulina. Alice was not capable, by temperament, of the kinds of tenderness that Paulina seemed to need. Alice observed. Alice made comments. Alice was, in the estimation of people who watched the relationship, not the mother Paulina required. Paulina Longworth Sturm died on January 26, 1957. She was 31 years old. The official cause was an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. People who knew her and who have spoken about it subsequently did not all find the word accidental entirely satisfying. Alice was told. She absorbed the information in the way she had learned to absorb things, in public, without collapse. She raised Joanna, her granddaughter. She kept going. Chapter 8. Alice alone. Alice Roosevelt. Longworth lived for 33 years after Paulina's death. She was 63 when her daughter died. She was 96 when she died herself, in 1980. She spent those decades being, with remarkable consistency, the same person she had always been. Sharp, connected, interested, unwilling to sentimentalize. She held salons. She received visitors. She made remarks about political figures that were quoted in newspapers and repeated at parties. She was, until close to the end, fully present. She did not speak publicly about Paulina's parentage. She did not need to. The people who mattered in her world knew, or knew enough. The biographers who came to her in her later years, and many did, received from Alice material that was generous in certain respects and carefully managed in others. She knew what she was telling them. She knew what she was not telling them. She had been managing this particular piece of information for half a century and had become highly skilled at it. Joanna, the granddaughter, grew up in Alice's household and under Alice's care, which was a complicated form of love. She has spoken in adult life about growing up in that environment, the presence, the wit, the sharpness, and also the particular kind of attention that was available to a woman who processed everything through irony and who had learned from decades of experience that sentiment was a vulnerability, The truth about Paulina's parentage, the thing that Alice confirmed in private and managed in public, has been established clearly enough in the biographical literature that it functions now as established fact rather than speculation. It is in the standard biographies of Alice. It is in the standard biographies of Borah. It is in the accounts of Washington in the 1920s and 1930s that treat both of them as significant figures. It is documented. Chapter 9. What this costs. Theodore Roosevelt had 6 children. He expected from each of them the vigor and forcefulness that he considered the primary virtue. He got it from Alice most visibly. She was in temperament and approach the most like him, which was both a bond and a source of conflict, because she was also the child of a first marriage he had lost and whom he had effectively abandoned in infancy. The relationship between them was never simple. He loved her. She loved him. They were too similar and too differently positioned relative to what had happened in February 1884 to be easy with each other. What Alice did with her life was, by some measures, extraordinary. She was present and significant in American political life for most of a century. She knew every president from Benjamin Harrison to Gerald Ford. She was a person about whom stories accumulated, some true, some embellished, all reflecting something real about who she was. She was not easily categorized. She was not, in any conventional sense, contained. What Alice's life also contained was Paulina, born in 1925, dead in 1957, in circumstances that no official version has ever quite accounted for satisfactorily. The daughter whose father was not the man whose name she carried. The daughter whose mother loved her in the ways that Alice was capable of loving. The daughter who did not survive. Borah died in 1940. Nicholas Longworth died in 1931. The men who could have spoken in different ways did not speak. Alice survived them both by decades and managed what she knew with the skill of someone who understood that the truth was hers to give or to withhold, and that the decision was one she would make on her own terms. She gave enough. She held enough. The truth about Paulina's parentage emerged after her death with the clarity that these things usually achieve eventually. Confirmed, sourced, established. It does not change what happened to Paulina. It does not restore what was lost in January 1957. It is simply the truth, arrived at in the way that truth usually arrives. Late, with less drama than expected, and carrying behind it all the weight of everything that was managed so carefully in order to keep it from arriving sooner. Alice Roosevelt Longworth died on February 20th, 1980. She was 96 years old. She had outlived her husband, her daughter, Borah, and most of the world she had moved in. She had been, for most of a century, impossible to ignore. She had also, for most of a century, held something specific inside the performance of being herself. When she died, what she had held became, in the way of all held things, finally available.